Profectory Podcast, Mastering the Mind and Market. Most successful CEOs and business leaders are those that make decisions quickly. Without vision, you're merely reacting. It all can come crashing down if they're not self-aware. Trends will eat politics for breakfast. There are these major global trends that are just going to decimate the way we think today. One of those, I'll just say this now, is AI. You're obsolete. I'd like to share some observations I made during a recent trip to Los Angeles. I was staying in Venice Beach, a few blocks away from the ocean, and one morning was enjoying the beautiful weather, enjoying the ocean air, and I wandered into this really cute neighborhood right by where I was staying. And these houses were on tiny little lots. We're talking 7,000, 8,000 square foot lots. And the houses themselves were probably 1,000 square feet, 1,100. And as I was wandering, walking around the sidewalks and looking at the beautiful manicured lawns and the weird California foliage, being from Arizona, very different. And I saw one house for sale, so I fired up realtor.com, looked, and lo and behold, an 1,100 square foot house, 2-bedroom, 1.5 bath, $1.85 million. And I thought to myself, that is crazy. Because my perspective on the way I see the world based on where I'm from, because I know exactly what $1.85 million will buy you in Tucson. It'll buy you 4,500 square foot, 5-bedroom, 3.5 bath with a 3.5 car garage on an acre with a big pool and a view and a beautiful barbecue in the backyard. So my bias, my perspective was just like blown out of the water. And that made me think about creating this podcast today. Because I draw inspiration from my daily life. So I thought, we need to talk about this because it's really important to fully understand what vision, perspective, bias is in business. And we're going to put that under the cognitive domain. There's also the emotional domain, which is the elements on how we connect and relate to our employees, how we connect and relate to our vendors and customers and all that. And then there's the behavioral domain, which is sort of how we act on that thinking, which is very important. For today's podcast, I'm mainly going to talk about that first piece, the cognitive domain, because it's something that is talked a lot in business, but I'm going to spend some time today giving you the Profectory framework version. And by the way, all these three elements, the cognitive, behavioral, and emotional, are basically under the umbrella of identity. Now, I talk about identity a lot, and it's something that you're going to hear over and over again. Identity is very powerful. It really helps to propel us in what we do on a daily basis. The way we see ourselves it is foundational in life and in business. And so I'm not going to go on a deep dive today on identity, but I will go on a deep dive on the cognitive domain. So what is that? What is those three elements? I mentioned vision, I mentioned perspective, and I mentioned bias. So vision is something that's talked about in the business domain. You hear vision, you hear mission, you hear these things, and they're sometimes tossed around like they're just words. But those words, what they represent, are very powerful. Because your vision is where are you going and why. And for you as a business leader, that needs to be made very clear to your employees, to your customers, to your vendors. Everybody should know what your vision is. Now, I'm not talking about vision statement. I'm not talking about something on the wall. But what are you aspiring to be? And that is a future state, but it's really grounded in what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. Let me break that down a little bit more. If your vision is to be well-known, it's basically to put basketball shoes on all the NBA players. That's your vision. What you do on a day-to-day basis needs to reflect that vision. How you relate to the media, how you relate to your vendors, all has to be aligned with that vision. And if that vision is crystal clear and your purpose is crystal clear, you will get to that point with enough hard work, enough luck, and rallying the right resources and the team around you. Very powerful. And so that vision is what aligns your strategy. That vision is what makes your teams inspired. And that is what keeps you going through uncertainty. Because in business, there is going to be uncertainty. There's a lot of it. So vision is that lighthouse. And without vision, you're merely reacting. You're not leading. Very powerful, something I've really taken to heart and I've studied over the years, because in my role as CEO of Infrared Labs, and I've told this to my employees, and I'm saying it now, I've got two main things that I'm responsible for at being the CEO of IR Labs. The first of which is to set and execute the vision of the company. That vision comes from our past, that vision comes from our present, and that vision's tied to our future. And that is my number one thing, is to set and execute. So that execute, obviously there's a lot built into that. And then the second job is to block and tackle. And that means that as my employees, my team members are working on things towards that vision, my job is to make sure that I push away and create a path so they can reach that vision. And that might mean that I need to make a phone call to a vendor. That might mean that I need to drive over to a customer and deal with some problems. So there's a lot wrapped into those two things, don't get me wrong. But I keep it real simple, because for me, if people know what my role is, there's no ambiguity. I'm not a COO. I've got a great COO that handles the day-to-day. And my job is that strategic side of what's the vision of this company, where are we taking this company. The other thing I want to talk about, the second thing, is perspective. Perspective was the impetus of this podcast, because I was in California as an Arizonan looking at a $1.85 million house, and my perspective was just blown out of the water. So that perspective is the lens in which we interpret situations and what we see, what we feel, what we do. And that's all shaped by our geography is one aspect. It's also shaped by our background, where we come from, how were we raised. It's shaped by our mindset and how we think about the world. We have a tendency to see a glass as half empty, half full. Perspective is forged by experiences, by trauma, you name it. There's so many things that build in to create that perspective. And I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a sociologist, so I'm not going to pretend like I know all the elements of it. But what I do know is that in the business aspect, that perspective determines which opportunities or threats we are recognizing, we're dealing with. It really helps to inform the decisions we make, and it helps to inform how we act on a day-to-day basis. It helps to inform our strategy. And the kissing cousin, the evil twin of perspective, is bias. So perspective is that lens. Bias is the distortion of that lens. And I talk primarily about bias as an element of business, because perspective is easy to understand. We see it. We literally see it. It's a lens in which we see the world. The bias piece, we don't see. The bias piece is the elements that are beyond our vision oftentimes, and it's up to a combination of things around us, which may include team members informing us, but most importantly, it's the fact that we need to be open to understanding that bias is there. So bias is a tendency to favor certain things, people, situations, whatever it might be, based on that previous activity in our lives, based on our trauma, based on our perspective. But it's that distortion that leads to bad decisions. It leads to flawed strategies. It leads to hiring people based on the fact that we like them versus based on the fact that they can produce what we need. So bias is that the element of, we'll call it, it's not, I wouldn't even say that you're lost. It's not that you're lost. Bias is that you see things differently. You see things through your own lens, and it can really cloud your decision-making a lot. So while I was working alongside Adam Hartung at Spark Partners, we developed a mnemonic device here for you to remember bias and how to work through it. So there are actual things you can do to remove bias partially. You could never fully remove it, but to at least push it away so you can have clear thinking and a clear perspective. And we use this mnemonic device called bowling. So let's go bowling. So the B stands for be aware of your bias. Believe it or not, by being aware of your bias at each juncture of a decision-making process, just by being aware of it is going to remove a good part of it. It means now you're open to different views, and you're suspending the fact that you have bias. Number one, very powerful. Be aware of your bias. The O stands for open the conversation to a diverse group. This is very powerful. We tend to surround ourselves with people that are just like us. They think like us, they act like us, they have the same kind of mindset like us. You've heard the adage of, you're the average of the 5 people you hang out with. It's very true. Those that are deliberately trying to build their leadership skills will find people outside of that group. You want to bring a diverse group of people to the table, because that group of people that don't think like you will inform you of your blind spots, especially if you are be aware of your bias. If you're open to the fact that your bias exists and you surround yourself with these people that are different than you, then guess what? You've now reset your bias. You've now reset your perspective. Super powerful. I'm not shy about my politics. I'm very libertarian. I always kind of have been. And I have friends on the extreme left and the extreme right, both sides. And I'm friends equally with both of these groups. And sometimes I invite them to the table, not at the same time, but I invite them to my table because I want to understand their perspective on something that I'm working through. If I'm working through a problem or I'm looking at a new direction I want to take my business, whether it's Profectory, whether it's our labs, I bring them to the table because they're going to give me a big swath of information that I may not have seen. So on the conservative side, I might see things differently. Wow, okay, I see what you mean now. And as well as the more liberal side. So very powerful. Invite them to your table, create your own personal board of directors, and have people at all levels, all ages. I've got people in my posse, if you will, that are super wealthy, and I've got ones that are living more modest lives, we'll say. So the W is, who are your competitors? And why is this important? Because competitors, when it comes to bias, will give you that perspective from their angle, which is not necessarily tainted by your bias, especially if you look at their actions. Obviously, unless you've got some interesting intel, you're not going to know what they're actually thinking. You're going to see their results. You're going to see their marketing efforts. You're going to see their branding efforts. You're going to see them, their products. You're going to see what's happening as they present themselves to the world. And that juxtaposition is going to give you your unbiased, to the extent it can be, and a more unbiased view of your situation. L stands for look at all of the customers, not just your own. Why is this important? We have a tendency as business people to focus primarily on our quote unquote core customers. These are the people that we're serving. These are the 18 to 25-year-olds that blah, 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 whatever they might be. We have that tendency to sort of put our products or services in that domain. If you look outside of that domain, whether it's the customer base or whether it is people that are outside of your customer base, you're going to then find opportunities for which you can turn your ship to create and get a bigger set of customers. I use this example about frozen pizza. So frozen pizza is something you can buy, and you would think the direct competitor of frozen pizza would be pizza you get at Domino's or pizza you get at a restaurant. But the real thing that it does, it actually competes with not only the pizzas you can buy out in the street, but it competes with fast food. It competes with a nice dinner at a restaurant. It competes with drive-through. And the reason I say this example is because that pizza is solving a problem. If you are the frozen pizza manufacturer, and you're only looking at your competition being brick and mortar pizza places, then you're missing the boat. Your competition, your market, your customers are way bigger than that. So very important to remember that. The I stands for identify what trends surround you. As you recall, my background in working with Adam and before and after, and one thing I really sing the praises of is the idea and concepts of trends. Trends are transformational. Trends are something that will decimate politics. Trends will eat politics for breakfast. And that's just the fact of the matter. If you look across time, there are these major global trends, these mega trends that are just going to decimate the way we think today. One of those, I'll just say this now, is AI. AI is having a transformational effect on all business. I'm actually working on a really cool podcast. I've got the information here. Is Thriving Through AI Hell, Leading Towards a New Renaissance. This is gold, and I'm going to present this next time. But you got to identify these trends. If you go to trendsrule.com, you can actually download a report that we put together regarding the top 102 trends happening and unfolding for the next 25 years. Very powerful. Go check it out. The N stands for note who can make you obsolete. Which one of your competitors, which one of your market drivers can make you obsolete with a stroke of a pen? Imagine you are working on an app that will soften your face. It'll give you the glowing sort of face of like you have makeup on. It'll make you look younger, whatever it is. Imagine 5 years ago, you've developed this app. And you're selling it, you've got some momentum going, you're excited because people can take pictures and then they can soften their face and make themselves look younger. Well, then you've got companies like Instagram and TikTok that build it in to their platform. You're obsolete. Yeah, there's maybe others that download it and buy it for their pictures in general, but you're becoming obsolete. Those are the examples of, note who can make you obsolete, because as you take your business to that next level, and if you're aware of who can make you obsolete, then you're going to change your offering. You're going to change your value so that you're ready for that, and you're going to go beyond that to make sure you survive. And the last is the G in bowling is get moving on making decisions. Goes without saying, but it needs to be said. The reason that this was so important for us to put in this mnemonic device is because many people, many leaders sit on decisions that they make in their brain, but they don't execute. Sometimes they even say it out loud. Sometimes they even say, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, but they never get it done. Very frustrating if you are working alongside a CEO or some sort of business leader and you decide on doing something and then it doesn't get done. And that hurts morale, that hurts momentum, that creates a new bias, that basically there's a whole chain of chaos that will emit from the fact you don't act. There's a lot of data to show that the most successful CEOs and business leaders are those that make decisions quickly. And decisions being right or wrong, there's not always a black or white answer to that. But here's the deal. You make a decision, you act quickly, it doesn't work, you fix it, you move on. And you're just continuously moving on. The alternative is you make a decision, you don't act quickly, you sit on it for a week or two or three or a month, then the market changes, then you act. By then, there's new data, there's a new direction, there's new competitors, whatever. And so you're missing out on taking that initial plunge. And I can go into more detail in other podcasts, but it's very important. All right, so I'll mention briefly the other two domains, the emotional domain. That's how we connect and relate. And from that emotional domain, there's empathy, there's sympathy, and there's compassion. And as a business leader and entrepreneur and CEO, your EI, your emotional intelligence, has to be 100% on point. I have worked alongside and for and with CEOs and business leaders that had terrible, terrible emotional intelligence. I was doing some consulting work with a company here in town. I'm not going to say who they are. And the CEO, during an all-hands meeting, yelled at one of a relatively new employee and said, "What, are you stupid?" about something that had happened. And I just couldn't imagine the morale how much it dropped by the collective employees. There was like 50 employees in that room. Him going through and saying, "Are you stupid?" to one of the people. And it wasn't like a joke. It was real. He was angry and he called that person stupid. Well, they quit about a month later, but imagine the rest of the employees. Do you think they're going to rally behind that CEO? Do you think they'll take a bullet for that CEO, metaphorically? Hell no. They're going to find a way to just do the bare minimum, and they're going to try to find a way to get out. Well, that company's still around, but luckily the CEO stepped aside, and now they're doing other things. But it just brought me a little bit of sadness in the fact that that's what occurred. So to break it down, emotional domain, empathy is how we understand others' feelings. So the business impact is if you're empathic with your employees, with your vendors, with your customers, then you're going to build trust, you're going to strengthen relationships, and in the end, you're going to improve collaboration. If they understand that you have that empathy towards their situation, you're going to build that trust. The Profectory note on that is empathy will inform better product design, better customer service, and make you a better leader. The second thing, sympathy, that's feeling for someone. So that's more a sharing in someone's emotional experience, and that may lead to compassion, which is the third one. So the thing with sympathy, it's got to be paired with some level of action. And yeah, you can be their emotionally support person, but when it comes to sympathy, action speaks louder than words. And with respect to your customers and vendors and employees and people around you, having that 1-2 punch, being sympathetic to their situation, but then ultimately leading towards an action It could be sending flowers. It could be making a phone call. It could be, hey, listen, let me connect you with, somebody. Hey, my son just lost their job, and you as CEO say, I feel your situation. Let me see if I can make a phone call in this other company and open the door for that person, whatever. And then the last one is compassion, which is empathy in action. This is very similar to sympathy in that it is an action, but it builds loyalty, it builds brand trust, and it's a deeper setting of empathy and of sympathy in that it oftentimes comes from the heart, but it also creates lots of action. Compassion, you've heard the compassion in religion, compassion in social work, but there's got to be a level of compassion in being a CEO as well, in business leadership. There's many moments in my life where I was struggling with something, and a fellow CEO, a friend of mine, or somebody I was working for, had compassion, reached out their hand, and was able to not only be my shoulder to cry on, figuratively, but also sat down and spent time with me to work through a problem, spent time with me figuring out solutions. And when that solution was framed up, then they made those phone calls. Then they sent those emails. And they said, listen, this is what's happening. There was a few times when I was in running my previous business as Terra, when cash flow is very difficult to manage when you're a small and growing company, a bootstrap company. And I looked down at our ARAP report, accounts receivable, accounts payable, and they were both about the same amount of money. So our accounts receivable was $452,000. I remember this pretty clearly. And our accounts payable was $454,000. And I just sat and I looked at that and I thought that was crazy. And so I talked to a buddy of mine and I'm like, what do I do about this? I've got this shortfall coming. And of course it moves quickly. Cash flow it's going to change on a sometimes daily basis. And that buddy of mine said, look, this is the way business goes. Give it a week or so. If it doesn't resolve, in other words, if you don't get more purchase orders, more payments, more invoices to mature and so forth, let me know and we'll go talk to either a bank or if you really need, I'll loan you with $100,000 to get through this situation. Fortunately, a week after that conversation, a customer paid that had been owing us a lot of money. They paid, and then we got a new customer, and within 2 weeks that had flip-flopped. We paid our bills and we were off to the races. But it was compassionate of that person to offer the ability to, hey, if you really need that, I've got your back. So a couple of other things that I'll mention on the behavioral domain. So this is how we act on your thinking and feeling. And there's a couple of things that I noted here. There's curiosity, there's humility, and there's self-awareness. So behavioral domain is how we really are presenting to the world. And curiosity is a very, very powerful tool to use. In my previous company, the one I mentioned earlier as Terra, one of our core tenets, we had 5 core tenets. One of those was we are curious. Because as engineers trying to solve problems, curiosity is the cornerstone of what drives you. If you're not curious, and you look at solving problems one-dimensionally. If you are curious, you're going to look at different angles and different ways you can solve that problem. And then you're going to go beyond that and start to develop additional experience and understanding. So when a new problem arises down the road, you can refer back to what you might have researched and found during your curious state in looking at that first problem. Very powerful. It does fuel innovation. Curiosity helps you to solve problems. Many CEOs that are around today, managing giant companies. I think it was Bill Gates that said he loves lazy employees in the sense that they're curious enough to find out a shortcut to get their jobs done. And it might sound like, doesn't really sound good, like, oh, I don't want a lazy employee. But what he meant to say is he wants employees to be curious so they can find better, faster, cheaper solutions to get their jobs done. And the thing about on the Profectory side, that curiosity counteracts bias and it helps to broaden your perspective. Think about that. Humility, knowing that you don't have all the answers. As a business leader, as a CEO, one of those elements of emotional intelligence, one of those elements of, I would say, leading in a compassionate manner is having humility. That if you don't know the answer, if you can't solve the problem, then you'll admit that limitation and you'll find an opportunity in another space. It's sometimes hard to do because we feel as though we need to be stoic in the lowercase sense. We need to be immovable and without emotion and lead from this cold place. No, compassion, humility come together, encourages your team to approach you because they know that if you don't know the answer, you're going to be humble enough to find the answer. On the Profectory side, it is a safeguard against arrogance-driven failure. I have seen that arrogance-driven failure so many times where, and we can even talk about big companies like Blockbuster. How arrogant was the leadership of Blockbuster when Netflix came knocking and said, hey, listen, we want to partner with you. You guys can handle the brick and mortar. We'll handle the mailing of DVDs back when they were doing that. They said, no, get the hell out of here. Then they approached them again years later. Hey, now we've got this, we have more momentum. We've got more critical mass. We see that some of your stores are closing. Why don't you just buy us? And then you can rebrand and you can do whatever you want to do with us. We just want to check out. This told no, second time. And what happened after that? Well, we all know how that story ends. Blockbuster eventually folded. They closed down their 4,000 stores. And Netflix is now on every TV and mobile device out there. And they've stayed with their true value of delivering entertainment. They've gone through the delivering of entertainment via DVD. They have delivered entertainment via streaming. They have delivered entertainment via being the world's largest movie studio now. And now they're delivering entertainment by going after games and e-games and so forth, esports. So anyway, good example. The last thing I want to talk about today is self-awareness. So understanding your own patterns and triggers. Self-awareness is a bitch, to be honest. And when it comes to bias, self-awareness is very, very closely related to bias. The reason I say that is that our self-awareness is going to be governed by our bias. And this is why meditation, this is why therapy, this is why there's so many elements of our life that try to help us be more self-aware. And the more self-aware you are, in my opinion, and in the opinion of many others, the better leader you will become. Self-awareness is not a destination, it's a journey. And I'm not a guru, by the way. I'm not some person that is sitting meditating hours a day. I'm much more practical than that. I mean, not to say that I'm not practical, but people spend entire lifetimes becoming more self-aware. I'm just asking you as a business leader, as an entrepreneur, to have some level of recognition of your emotions, your biases, and how they affect your decisions. Clearly, that is what self-awareness is. There's also deeper levels of self-awareness that have to do with motivation. Why do you do what you do? And if you go down deeper than that, there's reasons why the why exists. And so I'm not going to go into that. I'm just talking about the high level self-awareness. Why are you making the choices you make? What is leading you to not make the choices you don't make? Why do you react the way you do when things happen? Why do you explode at your vendors when they're late? So these are all elements that you can ask questions and questions and questions. A leader without self-awareness is a risk to your vision, to the vision of the company, and it all can come crashing down if they're not self-aware. I know of another company that folded. It was a small empire. It was actually a chain of restaurants that had a very arrogant leader and founder. And it got to the point where that arrogance got the best of him, and he made some very ridiculous decisions. And in the course of 3 months from those decisions, all the restaurants closed down. And that's how fast these things can happen. The self-awareness got him in trouble. There was some legal issues as well. There was some financial legal issues in that domain. It all came crumbling down. So I want to just wrap up today in the, having you think about the perspective and bias. Remember the acronym BOLING, why it's so important. Remember that being an entrepreneur, business leader, CEO, it is more a sense of a progress, not perfection. It's a sense of not only thinking through things, but acting through them as well. It's about surrounding yourself with the right people. The right, quote unquote, in this sense means all the people you can get around you that support you. And even those that don't support you, every once in a while, it's good to have in your domain, because they're going to give you. I actually had when I had my company years ago, I had an unofficial board of directors, and I had 5 people on that board of directors. One of those persons was a CEO that I disagreed with so many times, and I kept him on my board. Why? Because I knew whatever he was going to say, I was most likely going to do the opposite. And that was when I told other people about that years later, they didn't understand why. They thought, well, you want a board of directors that fully supports you. You want people that help you to get to that next position, that open doors. And I said, yeah, that's true. But I reserved that particular seat for that person because I knew that they had their ulterior motives in mind, and they're going to show me the way by not showing me the way of the best decision I need to make for my business. That whole conversation, the whole idea with that board of directors, I'm definitely going to talk about at a different podcast, because that is what led to, we'll say, a complete new branch of my life that's led me to today, and a very powerful situation with that board of directors. So I'll wrap up for today, and I do have some things I'm working on. I mentioned this podcast on thriving through AI hell, and it is very powerful. I'm going to be talking about Mo Gadot and Jeffrey Hinton, who are both instrumental pillars in the AI space and some of the dangers they see. And I'm going to also cover what you can do as a business leader to prepare for that, and just somebody actually in the world today to prepare for lots and lots of changes. So with that, I'll talk to you later. Cheers.